Okay, Algebra 2. This should be Tuesday the 28th. And yesterday we started looking at this sigma notation, this fancy E right here, and what it meant. Remember what that means? We simply add up all the terms. And all might be an iffy word to use there, because remember, you're not doing every single possible number. You're only doing the numbers you get when you start at your starting number and go up through your stopping number. Okay, so it's 4, 5, 6, whatever that we're adding up. All right. Now, a couple ins and outs about this start and stop number. You don't always have to start at 1. Look here at problem number 1. I is equal to 0. That's just simply your guideline of what that's the first thing you plug in. So the first thing we would plug in here would be a 0, and we would do 5 times 0 minus 2. We get an answer of negative 2. Then we're going to go all the way up to 3, so we plug in 1. 5 plus 1 minus 2. That's 5 minus 2, that's an answer of 3. Plug in a 2. 5 times 2 is 10, minus 2 is 8. And finally, we'll be done when we plug this 3 in. 5 times 3 is 15, minus 2 is 13. So we start plugging in whatever that lower bound is, 0. We plug in all the way up to our upper bound, which is a 3. And now that we have those numbers, we just simply add them together. And so you can do that in your calculator. I got 22, so double check me on that one. Okay, so that starting number and that stopping number, they can be anything they want to be. You don't have to always start at 1, okay? Because here's something that typically happens to you. Start at 3, go to 5. So we're going to plug in a 3, because that's our first number down here. We don't always have to plug in 1 first, okay? It's whatever this lower bound is. And we do 1 minus 3, we get an answer of negative 2. Then we'll plug in 4, and we'll do 1 minus 4, we get an answer of negative 3. We plug in 5, we get 1 minus 5, we get an answer of negative 4. Now when I add up these three, I get a negative answer of negative 9. So we can get negative answers, that's okay. It all depends upon what this rule is and what kind of answers we generate each time. It can be a positive, it can be a negative. Okay? But again, you don't always have to start at 1. Matter of fact, it tells you where to start. You start plugging in that bottom number, that lower bound. You plug in every number after 3 until you reach the upper bound of 5. So in this case, we plug in a 3, plug in a 4, plug in a 5. Okay? Whoops, guess I shouldn't erase it. That's okay. So down here on number 3, your rule can be, again, it could be whatever it wants. Here it's 3 over n. And what are we going to start off with? N equals 4, and we're going to stop when n equals 6. So what does that mean when I see a 4 here and a 6 here? I plug in a 4, I plug in a 5, I plug in a 6, and I'm done plugging in. What do I plug them into? Whatever the rule is. So when I plug in 4, I get a fraction, 3/4. When I plug in 5, I get 3/5. When I plug in 6, I get 3 over 6, and if you wanted to make that 1/2, you could. Then what do I do with those? I add them together. So punch these fractions in your calculator. It doesn't matter which one you use down here, 3/6 or 1/2. Use your fraction button, plug them in, add them up, and I get 1 and 17/20, or what would that be? 37 over 20. Either one of those answers. Okay, so a couple things from today. Pay attention to what you're starting with, because you're not always going to be plugging in 1 to start. All right, this tells you exactly what number to plug in, and then stop at the top, your upper bound. Don't be scared off by negative answers, and don't be scared off even by fractional answers. Your answers are whatever gets generated after you add them in your calculator. Okay, so they can be positive numbers like we got yesterday. They can be negative. They can be fractions. We can start down here with 1, we can start with 0. This one we started with 3, down here we started with 4. It doesn't matter. It's whatever number's down here in the lower bound, that's what we start with. Okay, first number we plug in. Whatever the upper number is, the upper bound, that's the last number we plug in. Then just make sure you don't miss anything in between them. Okay, and you'll be good. Not a lot to this if you just know how to follow the rules for it. Okay, all right. Short homework, and submit your picture like usual. See you tomorrow.